Toy-polloi, a shadowy flight into the dangerous world of a toy restorer who does not exist. Toy-polloi, a young loner on a crusade to champion the cause of the broken, the helpless, the powerless, in a world of collectors who operate above the law.
Welcome to Toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from Toy-polloi, and in today's video we are looking at a vintage G.I.Joe Raptor. As you can see here, I have a few of them in front of me and they all have the fairly common issues of broken pelvis, damage to the rear wings and also missing feet on the Falcon, and those are the areas that we're going to try and fix up today. So let's get on with the video and we'll see what we can repair. Okay, so here's a selection of Raptor bits that I pulled from my sort of junk parts pots, and as you can see he's in a fairly sorry state, but this does cover pretty much all the issues that you get with this figure and some very common issues that you get on G.I. Joes in general. This is probably the most complete Raptor that I have. It's not looking too bad, but he does have the standard broken pelvis, so we need to fix that up. There is also a tear on one side of the fabric wings, and I think we can possibly sew that, so we need to sort that out. The other really common issue with this figure is the little Falcon that you get as his accessory. He is often missing his feet, or his feet are broken, and as you can see on this one the feet are completely missing, so we're going to have to work out some way of trying to recreate those so that it can clip back onto his arm. The first thing though I think I want to do with all of these is actually to give them a good clean. None of these have been cleaned, they've just arrived like this. This set of wings is actually not too bad, but I think it will still need a wash. So yeah, the first thing to do is to give them a good wash. I'm just going to be using hot soapy water and a toothbrush to get into all the sort of the nooks and crannies. I'm not going to bother taking these figures apart just as yet, apart from obviously the one that's fallen to pieces. So I will just wash them as they are. The wings I'm going to also wash in some hot soapy water, but just very carefully brush with a toothbrush to get any sort of dirt and grime off them. And I'm going to try and dry them as flat as I possibly can, so we end up with something that actually looks like it would have done originally. This set here don't have a tear on them, but you can see how dirty they are. If we compare the colour of the two, I think that's probably more the original colour, but these ones here are a little bit sort of faded and brown. So I'm hoping that washing these will take some of this sort of dirt and grime out, and we'll end up with a reasonably nice set of these rear wings. So that's the first thing to do: hot soapy water and a toothbrush, and just go very gently with them. So let's get these all cleaned up. Right, everything is now clean and it's already looking a whole lot better. It's quite interesting, while I was cleaning it, the sort of little headpiece there fell off that one, so that needs gluing back on. But all the other pieces are looking pretty nice. This one here that's in pieces, it looks like someone has actually cut this apart using a hot knife, because there's quite a lot of damage to the back part here, and you can see also that the post has been sheared off. So I reckon what's happened there is that screw, the head has got damaged, and someone has tried to cut this figure apart because the screw couldn't be taken out. But you know, it's something that we can sort of fix and use parts from. So the first thing to do is actually build one good one out of these pieces, and then all of the other pieces I will fix up and we can make another one out of that, and I'll show you all of the repairs as we go along. So I'm just going to quickly take one of these apart. We need the pelvis from that one, we use that arm, I think we use that arm, we use this head. Essentially I will make one nice one, and then I'll put all of the good pieces that are left together, and that's the one that we'll start fixing up, and we'll sort of repair the pelvis and repair the cracks on the elbows. Yeah, and then we'll start building the bird's feet as well. So let's do a quick strip down of these, and we'll make a couple of nice figures out of what we've got. So after a bit of swapping of parts, I've now ended up with one really pretty nice looking figure. There are no cracks in the elbows, the pelvis is complete, the headdress is on. That is going to be sort of the main figure I'm going to display at the end of this, but I might as well fix up this one because all of the issues on this one can be fixed, and there are some issues that I've never seen before. First up, we have the broken pelvis. The front part of the pelvis is missing. I've shown how to repair that many times, and I'm going to do exactly the same fix today. Basically, I will drill a hole into the remains of this pelvis, then I'm going to insert a tiny piece of paper clip into that hole, shape it, and on top of that I'm going to use milliput to build and sculpt the missing piece, and then I'll paint that up. That's it's a fairly simple fix and one that I've done many times before, and you end up with a pretty good repair. This one does have an issue that I've never seen before, and that's mainly because one of the donor figures, as I say, I think had been cut apart using a hot knife or something like that. The back section of this one is really nice. It's still got the little pips on it. This is the front section from the one that was cut apart with a hot knife, and what's happened is there should be two holes on here that these little pips and posts push into, but because it's been cut with a hot knife, those have melted over, so I'm going to have to drill those out using a pin vise so that these two parts will then sit nicely back together again. You can see at the moment I can't push those together because those posts have nowhere to go. So that is a problem I've never seen before, but it should be pretty straightforward to fix. The headdress also needs gluing on. That should be fairly straightforward, just a bit of super glue onto the back of that. And then another typical problem is cracks in the elbow joints there, and that's the fix I've shown before. We will use some super glue and some baking powder, and we can just drop that in using my pin tool, and we'll rebuild that and make those nice and secure. So there's a nice lot of little fixes to do. I think the first one I'm going to do though is this, because I've never seen that before. So let me get the right sort of size drill bit into my pin vise, and we'll see if we can drill some holes in so that chest piece actually fits together again. Okay, so I put a 1.5mm drill bit in my pin vise, which seems to match with the size of the posts on this back section. But as I say, this has been cut apart with a hot blade, so it's melted where the little posts should go. So I've got to sort of do a little bit of a guess as to where they go. I can just about see them on the right hand side. The left side is a little bit less obvious, but I'm going to use the sort of the remaining post that's there as my guide. I think I just need to drill in. It's an incredibly short distance, maybe 2mm, but until I've done that, these two pieces will not sit together. So yeah, a fix I've never done before, but sometimes when people repair toys and you have to repair on top of an old repair, this is what you've got to do. You've got to sort of work your way around a problem, and I think this would work. So yeah, let's get drilling. That was actually a lot easier than I expected. As soon as I started drilling in, you could feel where the hole was, and the sort of the melted plastic started to give way. In fact, I found one of the original posts there, which was just inside the hole. So that's now drilled out. Hopefully this will fit back together quite snugly. So I'll just push those together. Yeah, that body is now back together. So it's an interesting sort of problem. I've never seen that before, and I probably will never see it again, but it's nice to be able to work out a fix for it. And I know that that piece will now fit sort of perfectly when I put the arms and the head back in. So that's really good. And while I've got my pin vise out, I'm going to now drill the hole into the pelvis so that I can get this piece of paper clip super glued in place, and we can start rebuilding that missing piece. So I've got a much smaller drill bit in here now. The drill bit is the same diameter as the paper clip, so it's going to be about 0.5mm. It's not very thick at all. You can get all sorts of different size drill bits for pin vices. I have a little pack of them here, so you just pick the one that you need for the job that you're doing. So I'll drill a very tiny hole in here, insert some paper clip, shape it up, and then I'll put a bit of super glue on and get that super glued in place. And while I've got the super glue out, I will also glue the headdress back on this head, because I think that's all it needs, just a little bit of super glue on the back, and that should stay on as well.
Shall we fix some toys?
You can see there I've sculpted a very crude replacement part just using some milliput. Most of the shaping I'm going to do when this is set, because it's such a small piece it's quite awkward to sort of shape it and get it to look like the original pelvis piece. You can see I've made it a little bit thicker at the moment. By the time this is set and it's gone sort of rock solid, I can then get some files and some needle files and I'll carefully shape this down and we'll make it look more like the pelvis. It will end up being a little bit thicker than the original, but it will certainly look much better than not having one there at all. So we're now going to leave this to set for 24 hours and I'll come back to it tomorrow and we'll get it finished off. While we're waiting for that milliput to set, we can get on with another part of this project, which is making some replacement feet for the Falcon. These are often either broken or missing, and on this one they are completely missing. So I asked some of my Patreons and followers to help me out, and I have to say a massive thank you to Ken from Toy Connections and also Dave from Vintage Toy Rush, who both very kindly took photos of the feet on their Falcon next to a ruler so that I could take some measurements. And from that I've started to work out a prototype, and you can see here this is my little prototype. It clips onto his arm pretty nicely. Currently doesn't look much like the feet, but I'm going to sort of deal with that later. What I wanted to get was something that actually clipped on. So if I remove that, you can see I have made this little piece that will in the end, after a little bit of sculpting, look like some feet, and that will fit rather nicely on there on the Falcon. So how did I make that? Well, if you've watched my channel a lot, you will know that I like styrene, and this is made out of various pieces of styrene. I've got some 1mm thick styrene sheet here, which I've cut into a 5mm strip, and that we will be using to make the curved part. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. And I've also got a couple of pieces of styrene rod. We've got a 4mm piece of rod here and a 2mm piece of rod, which is what I use to make the connecting piece. In the end, I'm going to be drilling a 2mm hole into the bird so that we can fit that in, and that should do a nice firm fixing. So how did I make the curved piece? Well, you need to heat up this, but you can't just do it with boiling water, which is what I would normally use. This time I've had to use a heat gun because you need to get it particularly hot, and then to get it the right shape I've actually just found a paintbrush which is about the same thickness as the arm of a G.I. Joe figure, and all I'm going to do is heat this up and then wrap it around the paintbrush, and we'll let that cool and then I can start shaping. So let's get the heat gun out and I'll do a little bit of shaping on this and we can start modifying it to look like that. And then I do have a plan to actually add some detail to this, but the starting point is to get a curved piece of plastic. Now you do need to move pretty quick. Once you've got the plastic hot, you have to move very quickly to wrap it around the paintbrush, and sometimes things go wrong. In fact, I've done a couple here that haven't turned out as sort of neat as I wanted, so just do it a few times and you'll get something that looks right. So I've now got this little piece which does hook pretty nicely onto the arm. We can start trimming away. So the original feet do have a little bit of an angle to them, which is what I've tried to replicate there. So I'm just going to trim that down with some plastic nippers and make them look a little bit more claw-like. And I've also got a little file here as well, so I'll shape it so as I go. And once we've got something that looks pretty reasonable, we can then start attaching these other pieces of styrene to make the attachment that actually fits it onto the Falcon. But you can see I've got a pretty nice curve there, so it's just a case of trimming it and shaping it until it starts to look a little bit more like a pair of feet. Now that we've got that sort of roughly shaped, I need to make the piece that attaches these claws to the Falcon. So I've got some 4mm styrene here, and what I want to do is insert a piece of 2mm styrene into it so that we end up with a sort of a thicker piece with a little post that we can then stick that post inside the Falcon, and and that will make a nice firm fitting. So first thing I'm going to do is actually to drill a hole in the end of the 4mm styrene, just using a 2mm drill bit. Then I'm going to plastic weld a piece of the 2mm rod into the end of that, and then we can shape it so that it actually fits onto this little sort of hooked claw piece that we've made. So let's get this hole drilled, and I'll plastic weld that in place, and I'll show you how to then attach it to the claws. So those two pieces are now welded together, and we just need a small amount of the 4mm rod. You can see what I've got here is just a little piece stuck on the end of it. So I'm going to take my plastic nippers and trim off most of this so that we've just got a little piece on here, like so. But what you'll see is that the end of this is flat, and we need to stick it to this curved surface. So I'm just going to take some fairly sort of high grit sandpaper, make a little curved surface with it, and then rub that along the bottom of there so that we end up with a bit of a curve on the styrene that then matches the curve on the piece of styrene that we have already bent. So it just needs a little bit taken off it, and you can now see that that lines up. So I can plastic weld those two pieces together, and there's the basis of the new feet for the bird. So at this point I'm pretty happy with it. It does look, you know, a bit like the claws, and it fits really nicely onto his arm. So if I just slot that on there, you can see how well that holds on, because there's still a bit of spring in the plastic, and that will fit very nicely on the bottom of the Falcon. But I want to try and take this to the next level, and this is the bit I'm not quite sure if it will actually work. My idea is I'm basically going to mix up a slurry of sort of offcuts of bits of styrene by just putting some plastic weld into it and mixing it up till it's a paste. And then I'm going to try and sort of paste it onto this piece that I've made and start sort of making a shape that looks a bit more like clawed feet. I can then sort of file it and fine tune it. I just want some more detail on this, because this is all very flat surfaces at the moment, which is what makes it not look like the feet on the original bird. So I don't know if this will work. It may end up looking horrid, in which case I'm going to use my prototype feet and I'll sort of finish those off. But it's worth a try, and yeah, something I've never done before. So I've got some offcuts of styrene in there. Let's mix up a slurry, see what we can do. Okay, that's what I've done. It may not look like much at the moment, but I think once that has dried and I've sort of sanded it down a bit, it's going to look a lot more claw-like. You can see it doesn't look like a bent piece of plastic anymore. It's got some sort of texture to it. The reason it's gone grey is because the little pot that I mixed these pieces in has some black bits of styrene in it, so it's sort of mixed together to make a grey finish. But I think that is going to work really quite nicely. I did start doing the other one as well, which has not turned out quite as well, but that's why you do sort of test runs and sort of prototypes. I think that is going to look pretty nice. Now, because I've mixed plastic weld in with styrene, it's going to take a very long time to set. So I'm actually going to leave this overnight along with the pelvis piece, which is still drying. So I'll come back to both of these tomorrow and we can do the sort of final shaping. But I'm actually pretty happy with how those feet are looking. I think by the time that's on the Falcon and painted the right colour, it's going to look really nice. It's now a day later and everything has had time to set, and I've started to file these bits into the sort of final shapes that I want. So you can see here on the pelvis, I've just got to sort of fine tune everything. It's not looking too bad. The edges need to be thinned down a bit, and I think that will work. In fact, if I get the legs, you can see that those do fit pretty nicely. It's a little bit thicker than the original at the moment, so that's why I want to sort of thin it down a bit, but the overall effect is pretty good. And you can see here as well, these new feet that I've been making for the Falcon are not looking too bad as well. There's enough sort of shape there that it hides the fact it was just a bent piece of styrene. So I'm going to try and put a little bit more detail into that and make it look a little bit more claw-like, but it does work really well. I can just clip that onto his arm, and you can see by the time that's painted, they're going to look pretty good. So yeah, let's do a little bit of fine tuning. I've got some files, I've got some needle files. I'm just going to carefully shape these until I'm happy with how they look. Okay, so I think I'm done now with filing. I've got most of the shapes that I want here. I've thinned this down a lot. It's still a little bit thicker than the original, but you don't want to go too thin because it has a tendency to snap even with the paperclip inside. So I think that will look pretty good once it's painted up. And on the feet, I've just sort of filed in a little bit of detail just to try and make them look more claw-like. So now these are ready for painting. So let's mix up some paint, see if we can get a good colour match. For the paint on this, I'm just going to be using some G.I.Joe model colours and some game colours. I've actually just been into my sort of pot of colours here, and I've got this game colour which is called Beastly Brown, which is 72.043, and that's actually a fairly close match, but I've mixed in just a very small amount of this other game colour which is called Leather Brown, which is 72.040, and that seems to have matched pretty closely. I'm going to put a coat on, I'll let it dry just to sort of double check that it actually matches, but you can see that's not a bad match. We're going straight onto white at the moment, so the first coat's going to be a little light, but I think that will match pretty nicely. So a couple of coats of that. I'm going to use the same colour on the claws, because looking at the photos that I've got of the Raptor, it looks like it's the same plastic used for the feet as used for the pelvis. So I think that brown will match, and it's going to sort of fit in quite nicely with the colour of the bird. It may be I darken that down just a little bit, because it could look a little bit sort of orangey red, but we'll give it a coat of paint first and then we'll see what it looks like. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how that's going, so let's just get this painted. That paint has now had time to dry, and I'm actually very happy with the colour match on that. It's probably about as close as I'm going to get. Matching a painted surface to a sort of bare plastic surface, you'll always get a little bit of a tonal change, but that is looking really rather nice. It does need a top coat on it, so I'm going to just put on some of this G.I.Joe satin varnish, and that will give it the same sort of sheen that the plastic has. You can see here that there's a bit of a shine to the plastic, and if we look at the painted area, it's very matte because the paints I'm using are matte, so that satin varnish will mix those two together. And the feet, I did end up putting another coat on this just with a little bit of black in, just to tone it down. I just thought the sort of orangey brown of that didn't match the Falcon sort of as close as I wanted, so a little bit of black in it, and that's looking pretty nice as well. So let's put the top coat on. We'll then let everything dry. We can start putting everything back together. We'll attach the feet to the Falcon as well. The paint has now had time to dry, and I'm really very happy with how this has turned out. The colour match is very close indeed. I did do a video a long time ago showing how to repair the pelvis on that Raptor, and I used a different paint at that time, and I think this paint is considerably better in the colour match. So if you're going to have a go, use the paints that I've shown in this video. So that figure can now be put back together, but before we do that, we need to attach these new little feet to the Falcon. The styrene rod I've used here is 2mm in diameter, so I'm just going to drill a 2mm diameter hole in the bottom of this where the original peg would have been. You can just about see the remnants of the post in there. So I've got a 2mm drill bit in my drill. Let's just drill a small hole. We can go up about 5mm, something like that. We can then trim that down and we'll put that in and see what it looks like. So let's get the hole drilled. Okay, that was nice and simple. So I'll get some plastic nippers. I'm just going to nip off the end of that, about 5mm, and we'll do a test fit. It may be that this will be a nice tight push fit and we don't need to glue it, but if it needs to be glued, just a little bit of super glue on that post will do. So let's push that in place. Oh, that actually is a really good push fit. I think my post is just a little bit too long, so let's take that out again. Just trim the end of that off just a bit shorter. Push that in. Yeah, that looks really good. I'm very happy with how that's turned out. Again, that is pretty convincing. They do look like the talons of a bird, and they are the right sort of colour. Yes, that looks very good indeed. I'm very happy with how that's turned out. So let's put the other figure back together. There's a few little repairs we need to do on his elbows there, and then we can sort out the rear wings and get those fitted as well. The cracks on the elbows are a very common problem on these G.I. Joe figures. You can see there that the joint has just started to crack. In fact, both of these have. There's a slightly bigger crack on this side, and we are just going to stabilise those at this point and hopefully fill them in a little bit as well, so they'll be harder to see. This is something I've shown a few times on the channel. All you need is a bit of super glue, some baking powder and a pin tool, which is a pin in an old paintbrush. So what I'm going to do is get a bit of the super glue, just put it onto a piece of paper here, and then get a very small amount of it on the end of this pin, and I'm going to touch it to where the crack is there, and the capillary action should pull that glue into the crack just a little bit like that. Possibly a little bit too much on that one, but that's okay. Then I'm going to get the baking powder and I'm going to sprinkle that over the top, and that will set it absolutely rock solid, and it should also fill in the gap. So let's just get rid of the excess of that. That's not too bad. You can see the first one is now filled in, looking pretty good. I'll get a brush in the end and brush away the excess. We've got a little bit more of a crack there just on the inside, so we'll do exactly the same again. Get a little bit of super glue on the end of the pin, allow capillary action to pull that in, just like that, and a bit more baking powder, push that in, and that should be looking pretty good. So I'll get the other arm done, then I'll clean away all of the excess. In fact, if I just get a brush now, all you need is something like an old toothbrush, and you can brush out the excess. Yeah, that is looking a whole lot better. So I'll get the other side done and tidy up the rest of this figure, and then he's all good to go. We now come on to the wings, and I did give these a good wash earlier on, and after I washed them I also ironed them so that they're nice and flat, and as you can see they've actually ended up looking pretty nice. This set here at the back are in really good condition. They cleaned up very well, and the little hoops at the top where the thumbs go through aren't ripped or torn. So this one is a very nice example of it. The one at the bottom here, it did clean up. It's actually looking a lot better, but it's a bit darker, and I'm sort of unsure whether it was sort of originally darker or whether it's sort of faded or aged, but it is a little bit of a darker colour, and unfortunately one of these hoops is ripped. You can see here on this side it is torn apart. Now I've been trying to think of a good way of fixing that. Mrs. Toy-Polloi suggested some of this iron-on mending fabric. You can cut a thin strip of that and then iron it on. The problem is though, it is a really light colour, and I've not found a way of actually sort of staining this to match, so you would always have a very obvious sort of repair on there. So what I want to try is actually to just do a little bit of sewing. There's enough fabric here that I think I can just about pull it together a little bit and hopefully put in 1 or 2 stitches. So I found some thread which is a sort of darkish brown, which will match sort of the back side more than the front side, and I'm going to very carefully put a couple of stitches in and see if I can sort of hide it that way and repair it that way. I can't think of a sort of a better way of doing this. It's a really awkward place. The hole is right on the edge of the fabric, so it's always going to be a weak spot, and I think that's why these always tear, but maybe just a couple of stitches through that will be enough to hold it together so it'll actually fit on the toy. So let's get that sewn and see what happens. Right, well I've managed to put a couple of little stitches in there, and I'm actually pretty happy with how that's turned out. You can see it's got a little bit of a pinch. It's being sort of pulled together because I've had to shorten the 2 sides to give enough area to sew into. but I think that will work enough. And on this side, yeah, that's pretty neat, so I'm happy with that. Let's put this on the figure and see what they look like all completed.
Now you know, and knowing is half the battle.
And so here we go, here are the finished figures. There's been lots of interesting repairs needed doing on these guys, some that I've never covered before, like replacing the feet on the Falcon. That seems to be a very common problem with the birds that come with these G.I. Joe figures. So I'm hoping that my repair here will have helped many collectors out there who have missing feet on them. It's fairly straightforward to do, a few bits of styrene, a little bit of paint and a little bit of sculpting, and you can get something that really does work pretty well. And as you can see on this one, they clip on really nicely, and I think most people wouldn't even notice that those feet had been repaired. I've obviously also covered things that I've shown in other videos, like repairing the pelvis. That's a very common issue with G.I. Joe figures and something that's actually pretty easy to repair as well. And if you get the right paint match, it's very hard to spot that you've actually fixed up the pelvis. So it's a repair well worth doing. Hopefully you have enjoyed this video. If you have, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And if you've really enjoyed it and want to help me out here at toy-polloi, then why not think about becoming a Patreon of the channel. You get early access to all of my restoration videos, plus access to an exclusive video series called On the Cutting Mat, where I show projects and restorations that you won't see anywhere else. So have a think about that, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching Toy-Polloi. Subscribe for more great videos.